The purpose of archaeology is to be a tool for the interpretation and a tool for the translation of the text. Archaeology supplies an illustration and widening of the biblical text towards understanding the material culture, the human thought expressed in objects. And it has also a very important additional tool. It serves as an additional tool to understand the daily life in Old Testament times, especially, but also in New Testament times. In any case, archaeology is not meant to prove the authenticity of the Bible, or it is not meant to prove or disprove anything. It wants to find out the material culture, and it has a very important significance in the ability of dating. The ability of dating the finds is something which is part of the skills of the archaeologist. This all developed from the fact that in the year 1890, a British archaeologist working in this country, Sir Matthew William Flinders Petrie, the father of the archaeology of Palestine, the father of modern Egyptology also, he discovered here in this country and here in Jerusalem, he discovered that pottery is datable. He discovered yet another principle which is so obvious that it is hard even to imagine that nobody thought of it before him. He discovered stratigraphy, that is to say, the study of the superimposed layers of human occupation one on top of the other. That is to say, whatever is on top is later than whatever is underneath it, and whatever is at the bottom is earlier than whatever covers it. This principle is used in archaeology since Petrie's time until this very day. The assumption of Petrie concerning the dating of pottery was based on observations of teacups of his own time. He could differentiate teacups from the time of Queen Victoria and teacups which were manufactured in the Georgian era beforehand. So he said if there is a difference in the shape of teacups in the history of his own time, Britain, then there is also difference in the manufacturing of pottery in antiquity in different times. And that axiomatic assumption was proven to be correct. In any case, today the pottery dating is very developed, and we can date with the help of pottery the houses in which pottery is found, or burials in which the pottery is found, and we can date the time of occupation of certain places according to the pottery scattered on the surface. So that is how we do archaeological surveys. We collect the pottery from the surface, and then we can understand the arrival of new waves of occupation or new peoples that invaded the land, or if a certain period is absent, we can draw a conclusion about the desolate nature of that region in certain periods. The dating is essential to biblical archaeology. Yet another aspect of biblical archaeology is the historical geography. In the Bible we have hundreds of place names. Most of them got preserved. The pioneer of the principle, who understood the principle of the preservation of names, was an American by the name of Edward Robinson, who came here first time in the 30s of 19th century. Following Robinson, it was mainly the Israeli scholar Yochanan Aharoni, but there were others in between them and others following them also. Yochanan Aharoni, who studied the principle of preservation of place names. This facet of biblical archaeology, historical geography, is very important because it enables us to understand the scenes of ancient battles. It gives us an explanation to the administrative divisions mentioned in the Bible. It gives us the ability to understand the process of conquest of the land, which is mentioned in the book of Joshua. In the book of Joshua, in chapter 15, we have a division of the territorial tribe of Judah into districts, and there are the cities of each of the districts mentioned. The list is not from the time of Joshua. It was inserted into the book of Joshua in a later date, and it reflects most probably an administrative division of the time of the 7th century BC. In any case, in the last 20 years, on the antiquities market, there were many bullae shown up. Do you know what bullae are? Those are small lumps of clay which were attached to papyrus documents. A papyrus document, a letter or a contract, is written on a sheet of papyrus, then they roll it up, they tie it with a string, and upon the knot of the string they put a ball of wet clay, and they secure to the face of that clay ball a seal. The seal is inscribed in mirror script, in negative. That is to say, the Hebrew goes from left to right, and the seal impression upon the bulla thus is going in the right way from right to left. Now, if the archive of documents or a single document went on fire with a conflagration which ended that building, the use of that building, then the clay ball attached to the papyrus was baked by the fire, and it got preserved. So in the 1980s, especially, Arabic people in the region of the lowland and in the Hebron Hills and the vicinity of Jerusalem began sifting the soil. And they did so mainly because of ancient coins. But you know that King Saul looked for the mules of his father and found kingship. They also looked for something and found something else. They looked for the coins, but they discovered the bullae, and they discovered that they can get much higher prices for the bullae than for the coins. So they were fishing for bullae. Those bullae were purchased mainly by collectors on the antiquities market. One large collection is in Belgium. Another collection is in America, and others are here in Israel. In any case, in those collections of bullae, there was a special kind of bullae known as the fiscal bullae. They have upon them the regnal year of one of the Judean kings. They have a name of a city in Judah, and they have the particle LMLK, Lamelech, meaning for the king. These fiscal bullae, we have now around 60 of them. They were discovered in the sifting efforts of Arabic families. Usually whenever there was curfew during the Intifada, they put the children and the women to do the sifting in the backyard of their homes. They bought some soil, they brought it over with a lorry, and they dumped it in the backyard of their house, and they did the sifting. In any case, since the early 2000s, we have some fiscal bullae which were found in controlled excavations. Most of them come from Jerusalem. One of them came from the vicinity of the spring of Jerusalem. It mentions the city of Bethlehem. Yet another one came from the sifting of soil from the Temple Mount, a project which I'm proud to be the director of which. And it mentions the name of the city of Gibeon. Yet another one was discovered in garbage heaps in the city of David, and yet another one came from a canalization system next to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. These were bullae which were attached to documents which accompanied taxes paid in kind in agricultural products. Wine, oil, fruits, wheat, barley, etc. Those shipments went from different cities to the king's treasury in Jerusalem, and they were accompanied by a document. So we have those documents from the vicinities of the royal treasuries of Jerusalem. A very interesting contribution to the understanding of the taxation system in First Temple period, especially during the time of King Manasseh, Hezekiah's son. Yes?
Some of these seem to be too good to be true, like Hezekiah and Isaiah bullae.
In those collections, private collections, already towards the end of the 20th century, there were some bullae of monarchs. One of them, of Ahaz, son of Jotham, king of Judah, and several of Hezekiah, king of Judah. These were suspected to be forgeries. As you say, too good to be true. And they were suspected, especially by American scholars. I think that this is no no reason to dismiss something. The too good to be true is not a good enough reasoning. You have to have you have to have in the object itself something that wouldn't fit the period to which it is attributed. The story is that in 2013, my friend Eilat Mazar, she is the granddaughter of my late teacher Benjamin Mazar, who was the chancellor as well as the president of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Eilat Mazar excavated south of the Temple Mount, and she found there a large building. The building is a royal building which is attached to a city wall. The wall is preserved to a height of 6 or 7 meters, very well preserved wall, and it is connected to another previously excavated structure which was first discovered by Charles Warren in the 60s of 19th century. Now, at the foot of that royal building, she found garbage thrown out from that building in First Temple period. In that heap of garbage, she found a large number of bullae, because she adopted a method which I developed. I must say, with all due modesty, that I developed the method of wet sifting, that is, sifting under a stream of water. She applied that methodology and she discovered large number of bullae. Among them was a surprise. The bulla which has the name upon it, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. And it has a two-winged emblem flanked by two signs of eternal life, the Ankh of Egyptian art. In any case, this was found in a controlled excavation. It is a very exact excavation carried out by a reliable person, and to my surprise, some of the bullae in the private collections, which were collected from the antiquities market, the illegal antiquities market, they are exactly the same, meaning they were made by the same seal that produced this bulla. So the bullae are kosher. They are okay. They are not forgeries. Now, Eilat Mazar found in that pile of garbage also a bulla which has the word Isaiah, the Yeshayahu, and it has in the next register it has 3 characters, Nun Bet Yud. I think it means a locative, that is to say, Isaiah from the city of Novi. Eilat Mazar herself, she suggested that this is a seal with the inscription Yeshayahu Hanavi, Isaiah the prophet. I don't think that a prophet would need to have his profession or his occupation mentioned on his scene. On the other hand, the origin is frequently mentioned on seals, but the possibility exists. The seal, by the way, I saw it. It's a good seal, for sure. Again, I also trust the excavator.
What are the major issues of today in archaeology, like the dating of the Exodus or other similar level of yet to be solved issues?
In archaeology, there are different trends and there are different attitudes of different scholars. There are different schools of thought, and There are some who would look for the date of the Exodus, while others would dismiss the story of the Exodus as non-historical, as a myth which never occurred in history. So one has to be very careful on what one would take from different publications. The subject of the understanding of the arrival of the Israelites is an essential question. It was taught once, especially by a school established by William Foxwell Albright, the great American scholar of the 20th century. It was taught once that archaeology would give the answer to those people who, based on the Bible, had different reconstructions of the arrival of the Israelites. You know that in the book of Joshua we have a series of battles describing the arrival of the Israelites, which was followed by the settlement of the Israelites. On the other hand, in the first chapter of the book of Judges, we have the stress upon the land which was not conquered, which was, the Israelites did not manage to conquer. And in the whole book of Judges, you have series of battles continuing much after the time of Joshua, allegedly. So the question is, what happened? There were two thoughts in this matter. One was the more fundamentalistic and sometimes secular fundamentalistic attitude of accepting the book of Joshua as a source. This was supported by Albright. It was supported by Yadin, Yigael Yadin, one of the leading scholars in Israel, and another one of my teachers. On the other hand, there was the German school, especially developed by Albrecht Alt, who said that the process of the arrival of the Israelites was a gradual process. They first settled, and only afterwards they had some military clashes with the Canaanites. So one school said battles first, settlement after. The other school said settlement first, battles after. And one school said the Israelites came at once and had a series of blitzkriegs, or quick battles with which they inherited the land. And the other school says that it was a longer process which took even some centuries. The second school, the German school of thought, supported also by Martin Noth, the German, and it was also supported by Yochanan Aharoni, an Israeli scholar who established the Institute of Archaeology at Tel Aviv University. So in Israel there are two schools of thought, the Jerusalem school and the Tel Aviv school, followers of Yadin versus the followers of Aharoni. In this matter, archaeology did not supply the merchandise. That is to say, we do not have a solution. We do not have a solution. The matter is still debated, though it is studied for about a century already, since the 20s of 20th century, since Albright started to work.
Now, one of the things that shocks almost everybody coming from abroad is how tiny is Salem, Yavuz, and this ongoing issue of whether Jerusalem was a little out of the way village, or we can imagine there actually being a kingdom that reached from the Euphrates to the Nahal Mitzrayim, to
Okay.
Egypt.
I'll give you an example. There was once in human history a gentleman by the name of Genghis Khan. He had a vast empire from the plains of Mongolia till the middle of Europe.
The largest ever in the history of the world, I found out when we had a Mongolian student.
Yes, it was the largest empire in the history of the world, and he ruled that empire from a tent. He didn't have a capital. He didn't have a capital and didn't have neither a large city. There was no city, which was his capital. So David and Solomon could have been kings without having a large capital also. That is one point. Second point, the so-called city of David, the ancient core of Jerusalem, has a size of approximately 60 dunams, 60,000 square meters. On the other hand, it was found out by Dame Kathleen Mary Kenyon, who dug in Jerusalem in the 60s, that also the slopes were settled and the fortifications were on the mid-slope or the lower part of the slope, and so the slopes have to be calculated into the urban area as well. Now, that brings us to a size of approximately 80,000 square meters rather than 60. And 80,000 square meters, that is already a nice size of a city in the Bronze Ages and Iron Ages. Lachish has an area of 80,000 square meters. Shechem is much smaller than that. Jericho is much smaller than that. We have only one exception, that is Hatzor in Upper Galilee. Hatzor has an area of approximately 800,000 square meters. Look up your Bible in the book of Joshua, chapter 11, verse number 10. It is mentioned as Hatzor, formerly the head of all those kingdoms. And that is something the Bible knew, that it was the head of all those kingdoms. And I have a difficulty in the attitude of some scholars today to date the text of Joshua to the 7th century. It is true that it was composed maybe in the 7th century, but it had to have some knowledge about the past. So it had the knowledge that Hatzor was once the capital of all those kingdoms, the head of all those kingdoms. V'chatzor lefanim rosh kol hamamlachot ha'ele. Joshua chapter 11, verse 10. In the case of Jerusalem, there is a problem. The city of David is excavated since the 60s of 19th century. About 150 years of excavations. Much of the area is very badly destroyed by continuous destructions and purposely done conquests and destructions. And second is the point that Jerusalem is settled on the same spot for the last 6,000 years. Since the Chalcolithic period, it is a permanent human settlement, and each period looted the building remains of the previous one. Just to take one example from the history of Jerusalem. In the 1880s was discovered the archive of El Amarna in Egypt. A peasant woman discovered it in the 1880s when she was digging for soil, ancient soil that would be used as fertilizer to her vegetable plots in her village. That was the discovery of the archive of the Foreign Office of Amenophis IV, or Echnaton, king of Egypt. In that archive there were 350 documents which are correspondence, exchange of letters between city-states in Palestine and Syria and the crown in Egypt. Among those letters there were 6 letters written by a certain Abdu Kheppa, king of Jerusalem. We have a king of Jerusalem, and we have lots of events in that correspondence connected with this king of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is mentioned also in the letters of other kings in that archive. Now, in 150 years in Jerusalem excavations, not even one building of the late Bronze Age, of the 14th century BC, time of King Abdu Kheba, was discovered. Not even one building. We do not have any fortification. We do not have anything. In 2013, Eilat Mazar found a tiny piece of a clay tablet written in Akkadian cuneiforms, which is the language also of the El Amarna archive. It is the same type of cuneiforms. It is dated to the 14th century. Chemical analysis of that small fragment showed that it is made of clay from Jerusalem, meaning that this is a local document from the El Amarna period. So that piece was found south of the Temple Mount. That means that there was in Jerusalem an archive which had the letters sent from Egypt, and had copies of the letters sent from Jerusalem to El Amarna. So archaeology proves that there was an El Amarna period. And the El Amarna archives, they speak of a Jerusalem which was a meaningful city. We have even earlier mentionings of Jerusalem in Egyptian sources, the so-called execration texts, which mention Jerusalem and names of its rulers already in the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC, around 19th century BC. And all that fits with the archaeology of Jerusalem. Yes?
Appreciating your vast knowledge in biblical archaeology and spending time with us. So as Bible translators, we believe the canonicity of the Bible. But at the same time, we have some difficulty to accept some of the facts in the Bible, especially the prehistorical narratives of Genesis 1 to 11. That's one area. But now I want to ask a question about during the biblical archaeology in the late Bronze Age.
Yes.
Every city-state has a capacity of population is very less. And if that is the case, the Bible speaks that 30 million people traveled from Egypt. They traveled all through the desert for 40 years. And they came into the land of Canaan. And even that settlement has a big dispute between maximalist and minimalist people. So my question is, out of your 50 years of experience in biblical archaeology, as a Bible student, we believe the scripture. But at the same time, when the other people ask a question, is it possible for 30 million people to come out of Egypt because they were in a hard labor in Egypt? So, what is your
Okay, you have embedded in your question. There are many questions actually. The question is whether the enslavement of the Israelites in Egypt is historical, whether the Exodus is historical, and whether the Late Bronze Age is the time of the story. It is a very complicated subject. I would say that, first of all, the Exodus appears only in the Bible. We do not have any extra biblical sources to corroborate the story of the Exodus. Number two, in the story of Exodus, in the book of Exodus in the Bible, there is a mentioning of the cities built by the Israelites while they were enslaved in Egypt. One of the cities is Pitom, the other one is Ramses. Now Ramses, that city is well known to us. It is in the eastern delta of the Nile, and it could have been built and existing only from the time that some kings of Egypt were named Ramses, and that is mainly from the time of Ramses II, one of the most important kings of Egypt, who ruled for more than 60 years in the 13th century BC. So we have an approximate dating for the Exodus if it happened. Number three, the state of Israel had control upon the Sinai Peninsula as a result of the Six-Day War. Following the Six-Day War in 1967, there were numerous archaeological surveys carried out in the Sinai Peninsula. Not a single piece of evidence was found for the wanderings of the Israelites in the wilderness of Sinai. Number four, for several decades already, the Academy of Vienna in Austria carries out excavations in the ancient capital of the Delta, the city of Tanis, ancient Avaris. This city is excavated by the Austrian scholars, and it was found to be a Canaanite city in Egypt, or meaning that the people there had the same material culture as people here. The city flourished in the Middle Bronze Age, what is the period known in the history of Egypt as the Second Intermediate Period. In that period, in the 15th, 16th dynasties, there were some foreigners who took over the rule upon Egypt, and they are known in Egypt as rulers of foreign countries. Among the names of these people who ruled the place, who ruled Egypt, and especially the delta of the Nile, among them we find names like Anathar, like Yaakov Har, like Hamoudi. Very good names. They sound very good in the ears of people who speak Hebrew, who speak Western Semitic languages. So the possibility of the Israelites being in Egypt and these stories being composed on the basis of Semitic presence in Egypt have some foundations. As to the number mentioned in the Bible is 600,000 men, and so they add the number of children and women, etc., and they get to blown up numbers. I would be very careful with the numbers. I would not accept any of the numbers suggested, neither by the biblical text nor by the scholars. I would simply try to ignore the question of numbers.
What are you hoping yet to accomplish your more specific area of interest in these days?
Since 2004, I'm directing the Temple Mount Sifting project, actually co-directing. I have one of my former students being co-directing it with me, and we work on soil which was illicitly removed from the Temple Mount. We sift through that material, which included 400 truckloads, about 9.5 tons of soil removed from the Temple Mount. We still continue. You are invited to join us. You can join us for several hours only. We have a place of sifting upon Mount Scopus in Jerusalem. In this sifting effort, we came up with approximately 500,000 finds, spanning a period of 15,000 years, from hunters-gatherers in prehistory till modern times. We have many finds also from biblical times, but also from early Christian, early Islamic, later Islamic periods as well. I'm at the same time working also in trying to sum up 7 seasons of excavations which I directed next to St. Andrew's Church of Scotland, where I happened to discover the earliest biblical verses ever discovered in the world. Those are 2 tiny silver scrolls, by the way, pure silver, what the Bible would call 7 times purified silver, Gesef Mezukak Shiv'atayim, and upon them there are scratched inscriptions. They are very tiny, very tiny. They are on display at the Israel Museum. You can see them with your own eyes. Both those tiny scrolls include versions of the priestly benediction of the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verses 24 to 26. And in addition, one of them has also a verse which we find in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7. האל הגדול שומר הברית והחסד לאוהביו ולשומרי מצוותיו. The great God who keeps the covenant and the mercy to his followers and the keepers of his commandments. This is a religious declaration. We have several times the name of the Lord repeated in these, the Yud Hey Vav Hey, the Tetragrammaton, repeated in these objects which are 2,600 years old. They are from the time of Prophet Jeremiah, approximately the time of King Josiah. And they come from the valley of Hinnom, which at that time was a place of foreign cults. Very interesting. In the Bible itself we have it that at that spot they had the Tophet, or the place where human sacrifices were offered to the Molech, the deity of the Moabites. So I'm busy with these 2 subjects, and in addition I'm also teaching in the Jerusalem University College that you know well, and I'm teaching also in the Israel School of Tourism, and I'm teaching also some classes in the Begin Cultural Center.
Now, I think you all share with me my excitement when Dr. Barkay agreed to come to our little group, but even though they're little, they're going to places around the world, so that what has been learned even in these short 2 hours is something that's going to have a bigger impact than what we can imagine just at this moment. And so we're deeply thankful. Toda Rabah.
Thank you for your patience.